Welcome to the Food Revolution Summit, where we explore how you can heal your body and your world with food. I'm Ocean Robbins, and I'm here today for our interview with Dr. Joel Kahn. Joel Kahn, MD, is widely known as America's Healthy Heart Doc. He's the founder of the Kahn Center for Cardiac Longevity and a clinical professor of medicine at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Dr. Kahn has triple board certification in internal medicine, cardiovascular medicine, and interventional cardiology. In addition to his practice saving lives as a cardiologist, Joel lectures around the world, inspiring health through proper nutrition. He's the author of several best-selling books, including Your Whole Heart Solution and The Plant-Based Solution, and the host of the Reversing Heart Disease Naturally Summit. His mission is to prevent heart attacks by educating everyone to eat clean and apply cutting-edge science to their lifestyle. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Kahn about preventing heart disease, about reversing diabetes, and about eating for optimal health. Joel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. You do such a great job, and let's go and talk science and health.
All right, sounds good. Well, you're a cardiologist, so let's start there. Tell us, heart disease is the number one killer on the planet, but somehow it feels like it gets to be old news, and a lot of people kind of don't pay a lot of attention. Why should we care about our heart? Tell us what's urgent here.
We should care about our heart because, as you correctly said, men and women equally are at risk for the number one killer in the Western world, dropping dead suddenly, a very, very dramatic, sad episode that affects more than 1,000 people a day in the United States, called sudden cardiac death. Others manifest heart attacks but survive, but their life's never the same. Some people just have their quality of life because they're short of breath, they're having angina discomfort. Some people are burdened by medications, procedures, expenses, early retirements. It is an enormous problem, and we know it's a interplay of lifestyle and genetics, and in terms of lifestyle, food being the most important choices, and it is a largely reversible disease. I won't say 100% reversible. It's a largely even before reversible, let's get more excited. Let's talk about largely preventable disease. A world where people did not have heart attacks, did not take medication, did not need bypass surgery and stents. This is not pie in the sky, but you're absolutely right. The cancer focus, the warp speed focus that our government at times has launched for other conditions has not really taken over heart disease. And we can do that today for hundreds of thousands of people because it is absolutely possible to live a life without heart disease. Hopefully you're doing that. I'm doing that. And we should share that with everybody.
Absolutely. Well, looking at population data around the world, are there some places where even after adjusting for life expectancy, heart disease is much rarer than it is in the United States, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. That has been found in scientific studies. And some are relatable. I mean, some are cities in the United States. It was discovered 40 to 50 years ago that if you happen to be living in Loma Linda, California, you were probably going to live 12 years longer than somebody an hour to your west in Los Angeles. 12 years of additional lifespan by mimicking the lifestyle of Loma Linda, which has now been designated by as one of the blue zones, these 5 longevity pockets. But if you're going to live 12 years longer in Loma Linda, you're also going to be having a much lower risk of heart disease, because that will be the number one risk, and that has been shown. There's this fascinating tribe in Bolivia called the Chimani, that's the way some people pronounce it, but they've been found eating a very jungle-based, plant-based diet. About 80% of their calories just come from plants, and they will pick up an insect or whatever other source of nutrition if they have to. And they get in into their 80s and they have much more than expected no detectable disease. So eating close to nature, whole unprocessed foods would be the example, and being active. And then there are many other examples in certain countries throughout Africa. The word heart attack and heart disease is almost unknown in hospital systems. So it's absolutely possible. Now, there could be different genetics between the average American or Loma Linda and the Chimani in Bolivia and populations in Africa and Eastern societies. It's largely lifestyle, though, when research is applied. They just eat better, they move more, and they have a lot of community support.
If you were looking for the top biomarkers or tests to run to assess somebody's risk of cardiovascular disease or status of cardiovascular health, what are the top things you would look at?
You can assess risk for cardiovascular disease, but even more important, I believe, and I'll present both quickly, you can actually find the disease specifically. So the standard medical model is risk. Do you smoke? Do you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high body weight, high blood sugar? And did mom and dad, brothers and sisters have early heart attacks, bypasses, stents, strokes, drop dead suddenly? And then you put that in a calculator and you say, Ocean, your risk in the next 10 years of a heart event is 3% or 33%. Or you can do that, but you can, for a very inexpensive, simple way, get a CT scan of your heart. I don't own a CT scanner, so I always am educating and lecturing on this topic without any financial conflict. For about $50 to $100 in about 5 seconds of your time at age 45 or 50, you lie down, quick little CT scan, painless, no injection, no IV, and you get a number. And if that number comes back 0, you've not just calculated the possible risk. You've actually looked at your heart arteries. That's what was done with this tribe in Bolivia, the Chimane. And at age 80, they had these 0 scores, freedom of disease, much more than other populations in the United States. So get a heart calcium CT scan. When you open the results, hope for a 0. And if it's 12 or 140 or 872, you do have heart disease. It's silent, it's beginning, and you need a wraparound lifestyle and medical program. But we need to build that heart CT scan into the medical system because it's very inexpensive and very widely available, like we've built in mammography and colonoscopy and prostate evaluations. And sadly, there's no money in it, and there has been a very slow uptake of a relatively old technique, but very current in 2024.
So this scan is looking for calcification on the arterial walls. Essentially, is there any calcium in there that's slowing the flow of blood?
Exactly right. Just like the common statement, hardening of the arteries, you take a nice, flexible, youthful artery to your heart, to your brain, to your sex organs, to your legs. Calcium deposits where the cholesterol is depositing, and calcium makes your arteries stiff and hardened. And fortunately, the CT scan can pick up that calcium with great precision at very little cost and essentially nearly no risk to the patient. It's a very easy test.
So we think that calcium's good, and we sometimes even take calcium supplements. Tell us, how is it that calcium in the arteries is bad and calcium in the bones is good, and what causes it to get into the arteries and not the bones? And is excessive calcium consumption in any way linked to this?
The topic of calcium and calcifying your arteries is a very important topic and slightly confusing. It seems pretty clear that getting calcium from your diet, those are going to be plant-based foods, green leafies predominantly. Love your arugula and your bok choy and your romaine and any other spinach and the rest. Do not lead to calcification of heart arteries. In fact, they're anti-atherosclerosis. They're part of the solution. They're part of the prevention. But then you get this enormous industry driven by concerns about bone health and osteopenia and osteoporosis and fractured bones, where there's calcium supplements and there's low dose and high dose. And there have been a number of studies that suggest that if you're getting much close to 1,000 milligrams a day or over that of calcium oral supplements and vitamins, you may actually, these are association studies, but you may actually promote the calcification of your heart arteries. So in my clinic, if we have to supplement with calcium, which I don't often, it's going to be on the low side, and it's going to be plant-based sources. Algae happens to be very rich in calcium, and there's a lot of algae-based calcium supplements on the market that are high quality. And the other factor, just to close up, there is this vitamin called vitamin K2. And many people, it's a difficult blood test, so you don't usually get a vitamin K2 blood test. But it's in the diet, and it's a little challenging for anybody, plant-based eaters and others. And it turns out a special bean from Japan called the natto bean is very high in vitamin K2. And you can buy that, and you can incorporate that in your diet. There are many supplements that often combine vitamin D with vitamin K2. And if you have adequate vitamin K2, your oral calcium and possibly your supplement calcium will favor going into your bones and your teeth where you really want it to strengthen them, and avoid going into your heart arteries and other arteries to calcify and age them. So that's a little tip we need more science on, but that's a reasonable synthesis.
Does vitamin D play a role as well?
Yeah, there's very good data about vitamin D. There's a general suggestion. Number one, it's a very common deficiency. It's certainly a lab test I do on every patient, and I encourage anybody listening to make sure they know their vitamin D blood level. Inexpensive, widely available. It's a very common deficiency. We've got great plant-based foods that provide vitamin D, predominantly mushrooms, and there's so many other health benefits to mushrooms in terms of immune health and even brain health for some of the mushrooms. But it's common. So taking vitamin D3 supplements, eating vitamin D-rich foods may lower blood pressure and may preserve the youthfulness of your arteries and avoid that calcification and aging. So important step.
What are the key dietary factors that fuel heart disease?
Probably two dietary factors fuel heart disease more than any other in terms of the scientific focus since the 1950s and 1960s. Two important dietary factors. One is the amount of saturated fat in the diet, and this gets so sciencey and technical people tune out because we've got omega-3 fats and monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. But basically, saturated fat, all we got to talk about is animal foods and coconut oil. You like cheese, you like bacon, you like red meat, you like egg yolk, you're getting a lot of saturated fat. And if you like coconut oil, you're getting a lot of saturated fat. And hundreds of studies suggest when you have a high amount of saturated fat in your diet, you will raise your blood cholesterol level. Some of us are more sensitive to that. Some of us a little less sensitive. Some people are called hyperabsorbers. Put some cheese and egg yolk in their gut and your cholesterol will rocket. It'll double in a few weeks if you keep that up. Other people are a little less sensitive to it. And that will promote, not in a day, but over weeks, months, and years, that hardening, that calcification, that heart attack and death risk. The science is strong. Every health organization worth their weight in arugula suggests you lower and minimize your saturated fat intake. And the second one is added sugar. And this has been a big debate over the years. Which one is worse? Well, they're both worse. And we live in a society, we've got added sugar, obviously, in our drinks, and we have it in our sweets, and we have it in our barbecue sauces, and we have it in our ketchup. And there's no doubt it might be a little less direct. The added sugar, you gain some weight, you become more insulin resistant, your triglycerides go up, your cholesterol goes up, you have some inflammation going on. So being sensitive. And the joy is when you eat a close to nature whole food plant-based diet, you're going to have a naturally low saturated fat diet, and you're going to have a naturally low added sugar diet. Fruit is not added sugar. Fruit is added joy. Fruit is added health. And in many studies for overall health, brain health, heart health, sexual health, fruit is about number one on the list for health promotion.
What about dietary cholesterol?
Dietary cholesterol has been a huge controversy. And one of the important teaching points for our audience here is the amount of saturated fat that the average American, as an example, eats is tremendously more than the amount of dietary cholesterol they eat. You know, an egg may have 200, 250 milligrams of cholesterol. Somebody told me that a toothpick weighs about 100 milligrams. So think about 2 toothpicks worth of cholesterol from a egg yolk. But you eat a cheeseburger, a milkshake, and French fries, you're going to get tens and tens of grams of saturated fat. So relatively, dietary cholesterol is a small, important, but small factor compared to saturated fat. Now, in reality, animal foods combine cholesterol and saturated fat. They go together. The only example that doesn't is coconut oil. Coconut oil is very rich in saturated fat, but because it's from a plant, it doesn't have cholesterol. Cholesterol only comes from the animal world. So with the exception of coconut oil, these two things track together. High saturated fat diets are going to be high cholesterol diets almost always. The latest USDA guidelines typically use language like lower dietary cholesterol to as low as possible. They don't put a number anymore, and that's created confusion. Now, a whole food plant-based diet, it's essentially a zero cholesterol diet, which is a joy if you watch palm oil and coconut oil as main ingredients or additives. So we do want to pay attention to dietary cholesterol, and every time you eat an apple and a bean salad, you can proudly say zero cholesterol in that meal.
What about TMAOs? Can you explain what they are and why it matters?
One of the most interesting new conversations in cardiology, advanced cardiology, is a molecule that goes by 4 letters, TMAO. It does stand for a chemical name, trimethylamine N oxide. Until 2011, this was in the science literature, but largely the science of fish, how do fish stay buoyant in deep, cold water where there's high pressure. And TMAO is a molecule found in some fish flesh that helps them stay alive under those extreme circumstances. But then the Cleveland Clinic published now thousands of papers around the world that they did a screen. What's in the blood that we don't know about that might be causing hardening of the arteries that we might want to focus on and learn about? And after their research, they found in both, unfortunately, animal models and then human blood, that TMAO is a molecule in our blood. They developed a blood test for it that is now available from labs. I draw it on all my patients, that your TMAO level goes above a normal range if your diet is particularly rich in egg yolk and red meat. I mean, this is a vegan cardiologist's dream research project, but it's authentic, and the researchers, who are friends of mine at the Cleveland Clinic, are not vegan. They weren't planning to destroy the meat and the egg yolk industry, but they did a pretty good job if you follow the science. And the higher your blood level, the higher the association of hardening of the arteries, scarring of kidneys and kidney disease, and almost any disease that's been studied. Dementia with a high TMAO, worse. Diabetes with a high TMAO, worse. Congestive heart failure with a high TMAO, worse. So it's a very powerful marker. And it may be more than a marker. There's some animal studies at least that show it literally causes hardening the arteries directly. So the hunt is on in the pharmaceutical industry and the academic world to find pills that will be patentable and will be TMAO blockers. And there will be some coming out. They're hot on that trail. But the joy, again, stop eating egg yolk, stop eating red meat. And there are some people that take vitamins that have carnitine and choline. If you take a big can of Monster energy drink, for example, you'll read on the label it's very rich in carnitine. That can also bump your TMAO level up. So look at your vitamins, look at your energy drinks. Obviously, give up your energy drinks would be the advice. And it's a joy to check a TMAO level in a good, healthy eating vegan because it's going to be undetectable. And it's another way to interact with people, educate them about food, improve their outcome, and actually, prevent heart disease. That's what we're after. And it's blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, but now TMAO is another measurable factor to focus on.
What about nitric oxide? Kind of looking in the other direction, a positive compound. Tell us, if you could, about nitric oxide.
Yeah, in 1998, the Nobel Prize Committee gave 3 scientists the award in medicine for identifying and then naming a little tiny simple molecule called NO, nitric oxide. 1 nitrogen, 1 oxygen bound together. Made in the lining of your arteries called your endothelium. And critically important to maintain those healthy, youthful arteries so you feel good and live good and don't need bypass and don't drop dead suddenly. And the science is remarkable. And now there's 50,000 plus research articles at least in human physiology, animal physiology, the more nitric oxide you make, the better. Your brain works better, your lungs work better, your gut works better, your heart arteries definitely work better, and very strong link to sexual health if you have healthy nitric oxide production. The biggest impediment is it's hard to measure in clinical practice. Very rarely will a doctor discuss with a patient NO, nitric oxide. There are books, there are ways to test it. Recently, a blood test is available. We do it in my clinic. It's, again, 4 letters, ADMA. That's the name of the blood test, ADMA. And you can actually get an idea, do I make a lot of nitric oxide or do I not make enough? And if you're a smoker, if you're eating poorly, if you never exercise, if you sleep poorly, you might be very under producing nitric oxide, and this blood test may give you that clue. And if you eat lots of watermelon and pine nuts and arugula and beets, you're going to make a lot, and you can check that. There's also a little saliva test strip. So we've learned since the Nobel Prize in Medicine that there's actually a second way to make nitric oxide, and it involves our mouth and our gut. And if you're eating leafy greens and you're eating beets and you chew them slowly to let the mouth interact with the nitrates in those foods, nitrate-rich foods, not bacon nitrates, but plant-based nitrates, you will make more nitric oxide in your blood. It'll impact your health and be a benefit. And that is why we emphasize kind of a mindful approach of chewing and eating and maybe not drinking down a green juice versus chewing a big green leafy salad. I mean, and I'd still rather you do a green juice than an energy drink or a Coca-Cola, but you might want to slow down and give it all a little tongue time. The only other quick little tip there is if you're brushing your teeth or using a mouthwash that has an antibiotic in it, you may actually interrupt the oral pathway to make nitric oxide, and you may not benefit from those green leafies as much as if you stop using those and shift to a toothpaste or a mouthwash that has no antibiotic in it if you really want to use one.
So you mentioned not the nitrates in bacon. This can be confusing for a lot of folks because we're hearing nitrites and nitrates, and are they good and are they bad? And can you explain a little bit of why not the nitrates in bacon and what's the difference between nitrates in plants and in animal products?
The issue about why doesn't bacon produce more nitric oxide if it has nitrates, of course, as a preservative, is on a couple different levels. Number one, of course, the bacon is coming with some other substances that are directly injurious to arteries, like the saturated fat content, like in the grilling, some of the chemicals and hydrocarbons you produce in, making your bacon crispy, they can damage the lining of your arteries. There's an interesting molecule in red meat that is rarely talked about called Nu-5GC, and Nu-5GC may directly injure arteries. So that crispy bacon may have nitrates in it, but it has a lot of anti-artery health chemicals that offset any benefit. And secondly, there is some science that if you take nitrates and grill them with high-fat foods, they don't work the way they do as when you're eating a arugula salad. So it might be the isolated nitrate is okay, but not in the way we actually present it to our mouth as we're chewing on a bacon strip. I have no ability to relate to chewing on a bacon strip. I don't think I ever have in my entire life. But for those that do, it's not going to get you nitric oxide or health.
What do you think are some of the most heart-healthy foods? Can you share a little bit about some of your favorites for bringing down LDL cholesterol, for bringing down blood pressure, and for supporting vitality and health?
There are so many heart-healthy foods, and they're all going to be found in the plant world over and over. What comes to mind, for example, is one of the senior researchers, happens to be vegan, Dr. David Jenkins, MD at University of Toronto, developed a dietary program 25 years ago, published in the Science, called the Portfolio Diet. I want to bring my cholesterol down and I want to use food. And he described in a research study, we're going to combine 4 food groups. We're going to get a lot of fiber in our diet, things like black beans, kidney beans, red beans. That's always a good choice. We're going to use a lot of oats. We're going to use soybean products like tofu, tempeh, and edamame, close to nature, maybe organic. And we're going to eat foods that provide what are called plant sterols, and particularly sunflower seeds and sesame seeds. We don't have to go to the vitamin store. We're just going to the grocer or the farmer's market. And in his studies, within just a few weeks, in people that were recruited with high cholesterol, their cholesterol fell significantly, about 25%, about as much as a modest dose of a prescription cholesterol medication. So those foods all get a thumbs up. And a little more recently, the Harvard School of Public Health looked at what's the outcome long term if you follow this portfolio diet pattern. And they showed a major drop in heart attacks and heart events if you eat that way long term from their database. So a lot more reinforcement out there. Everything red is usually good for the heart except for beef. So red peppers, strawberries, apples. Of course, apples are rich in, we can always go to the basics and talk about why are apples so healthy. I mean, they're just healthy, but, we can talk about quercetin and fiber and water and vitamin C and other chemical names, but you can keep it simple. Beans, peas, and lentils, without a doubt. Almost any disease you talk about, the more legumes you eat, they're certainly associated with some of the best longevity worldwide in scientific studies. A major nutrition analysis called the Global Burden of Disease Study, which looks at hundreds of populations and countries and millions of people, found that the 3 top foods for long-term health were whole grains, nuts and seeds, and beans, peas, and lentils, legumes. And just below that were fruits and vegetables. But you can take it to the bank scientifically that those food groups will enhance your heart health, lower your cholesterol. That's why the famous bowl of oatmeal with some ground flaxseed, walnuts, and a couple blueberries, maybe some cinnamon and nutmeg on top will, always be a joyful breakfast for anybody.
I'm curious about omega-3 fatty acids and your take on their significance to cardiovascular health.
When we talk about omega-3 fatty acids, I actually tell my patients, I wish children got a coloring book that taught them on this topic so that they would get the right information early. The only fat we need in our diet, we can go off on controversies, but the science is we have to have omega-3 fatty acids in our diet, and we can't produce them, and they're crucial for brain health, for optimal cholesterol levels, for vision, for joint health. And I can tell you from drawing a blood test, which is available, called the Omega Index, from major labs that are out there. People can ask their doctor for it. It's an enormous deficiency, both in plant-based eaters and in omnivores, because they're eating their beef and their chicken and their pork, which have no omega-3. And if they're not focusing on salmon and sardines, they're going to be deficient. It's a widespread deficiency, and often profound deficiency. And we do know that we can select foods that will bring our blood levels and our health and preserve our cardiovascular health up. So that's why we teach 2 tablespoons a day of ground flaxseed, or maybe you prefer hemp hearts, or I'm blanking on the third for a minute, excuse me.
Chia seeds?
Yeah, chia seeds, thank you. For some reason, that escaped me, because I do ground flaxseed and hemp hearts much more than chia seeds. I love chia pudding. Walnuts have much more omega-3 boosting ability than other nuts, and there's data for other nuts, but walnuts, they look like the brain if you look at them, and omega-3 is so important for the brain, so there's a little clue there every time you throw a couple walnuts in a salad. It's a healthy thing to do. Some of the algae, chlorella and spirulina, if you enjoy those in your food, a smoothie, will be very rich in omega-3, and you really want to focus on that. Now, some people choose omega-3 supplements, and after you've exhausted the food route. Some of us aren't as efficient in converting a walnut or a flaxseed into the final EPA, DHA. And you can, if you're in a clinic that doesn't, monitor that. And if you need to, we have all kinds of algae-based omega-3 supplements if needed. So I do rely on one myself to get my blood levels optimal, but that's something you need to discuss with your healthcare provider.
There was some research in 2023 that came out telling us that almost half the fish oil supplements on the market were rancid. And by the way, the researchers included algae-based omega-3 supplements in this study, although they did not distinguish in terms of their overall results. But they looked at a lot of different brands, and they felt that the conclusion was that rancid fish oil or omega-3 supplements were actually worse than useless in terms of net effect on physical health. Can you speak a little bit to the rancidity problem and what someone can do about it?
Yeah, this is a tough one that kind of touches on supplements in general. I'm schooled in supplements. I do selectively use them in my clinic, but they're regulated, but not in the way the pharmaceutical industry is regulated. And we know there's problems in the pharmaceutical industry with contamination and problems that develop that we didn't anticipate when drugs are released. So there's going to be at least as many problems with supplements that may not be as highly regulated. And you probably want to be a bit of a snob when you pick your algae omega-3, and there is no test for rancidity. You probably don't want to leave, just like you don't want your spices to sit in your spice rack for 10 years, you're probably not going to have the same potency out of your turmeric and cinnamon as a fresh bottle. You similarly want to do that with your supplements. I wouldn't take a bottle of algae oil that's been opened and sitting around for a couple of years. Regularly replace it. And the other issue, just to finish up on a good question, is the heavy metals, mercury. We do know that mercury concentrates in fish in the wild. You can get fish from Alaska. They're contaminated with mercury, and you can get farm raised fish, and they're very contaminated with mercury. So you really want to pick a supplement, particularly a fish supplement, that says tested and evaluated for mercury and not present, because mercury toxicity and heavy metal toxicity is actually a burden for heart disease. A recent paper about lead in heart disease indicated that millions of people worldwide are suffering high blood pressure and other direct manifestations of heart disease from what are called heavy metal toxicity. And fish oil is a major one in terms of particularly mercury. So be a qualitarian. That's a word that I picked up out there when it comes to your supplements, for sure.
I think another piece is particularly to think of all the omega-3s as perishable. Like you wouldn't leave something that's perishable out in the cupboard for months and months. So keep it in the fridge, keep it fresh. Some folks, like I know Complement is a brand that you and I both have some affinity with, and you get they offer a subscription service, so you get another refill every month. So then presumably it's pretty fresh, and they're keeping it, we have to assume, in cold storage and keeping it circulating within their system so that you're getting something fresh, and then you use it fresh, and you keep that cycle going, rather than getting a big thing sitting, as you say, in the cupboard for months or even years, where it can absolutely go bad. So keep your brain turned on with the omega-3s. Think of them as perishable. Keep them fresh. Keep them cold. Keep it moving. And that's a great tool, too, because I'm sure a lot of the rancidity happens in the home, not necessarily in the store.
I think it's a great suggestion to keep your omega-3 supplements in the refrigerator. I actually have a few patients put them in the freezer, and they actually just throw it in a smoothie, and they're really protecting from oxidative stress and rancidity. And you're right, buy a month at a time and use them up and reorder. For example, Complement provides that auto prescription program that I use, and glad to hear you use too.
And if you buy flax oil, you can look at the date on it. Some of them actually say pressing date, and some of them just say expiration date, but make sure that expiration date is way out there. And then again, keep it moving. Yeah. Thanks, Joel. I'd like to talk about other aspects of lifestyle and how they affect cardiovascular health. The Ornish program talks about the 4 pillars of lifestyle medicine: eat better, stress less, love more, and move more. Can you touch a little bit on, in addition to a healthy diet, what are the other things we want to do for cardiovascular health?
Yeah, well, representative of the issue of other lifestyle pillars beyond nutrition, beyond whole food, plant-based nutrition. I'll give an example. The American Heart Association, the same organization that will put their symbol on Fruit Loops, so one has to question their authority and sanity at times. But some of what they do is good. And they used to talk about life's simple 7. 7 things you can judge or assess that give you some clue to your risk of heart disease, things like fitness and diet and your blood pressure and your blood cholesterol and all, smoking. So they've changed that to the essential 8 now in the last year. What was maybe year and a half, what was the 8th one they added on? They added on sleep. sleep quality. And I'm actually going to start there, even though it's the last one they added to the list. When I trained in medical school, which is actually more than 40 years ago, we had maybe 30 minutes on sleep and 20 minutes on nutrition. Now sleep is the big topic. If you want to keep your arteries healthy, you work on your sleep. If you want to avoid obesity and type 2 diabetes, you work on your sleep. If you want to avoid high blood pressure, you work on your sleep. And I used to be, like so many physicians in training, up at 4:30, at the gym at 4:45, and at the hospital by 6. Did that for decades until about 10 years ago when I said, I got to come up with a new program and come up with a shorter workout or an evening workout or more on the weekend. We do know now that weekend warrior workouts are actually healthy and do offset maybe a shorter workout during the week. So focusing on absence of snoring, absence of gasping, trying to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep relatively uninterrupted by waking up or the dog turning over, which is my house, or snoring or having to go to the bathroom. Whatever it takes, all that sleep hygiene could be natural supplements, could be meditation, could be white noise or eye masks and the rest. Do whatever it takes. So that's step one. And there is now the ability to get something called a home sleep study. Very simple, inexpensive way to ensure, which I think is important as checking your blood pressure, is get a home sleep study and make sure you're not suffering moderate or advanced sleep apnea. And a recent survey in the United States of over 2,500 randomly selected people, 50% doing a home sleep study had moderate or severe sleep apnea determinations, which can shorten your life, enhance your dementia, raise your blood pressure, make you obese, and is treatable. So there's the big tip. The second big transformation is just natural movement. Yes, gym time is great. And yes, group classes are great. And yes, riding your bike 50 miles is wonderful. But I'm standing and I have treadmill desks at home and treadmill desks in my office. I see patients 8 hours a day walking a treadmill. They think I'm a little nuts, and then they go buy one and they love it. Take a 5-minute break at lunch. Park your car further. Take the stairs, not the elevator. We've heard these things, but we have learned that these little exercise snacks, that's what a lot of people call them, 2-3 minutes of raising your heart rate on a break between clients or break between calls, take your calls standing. All this stuff really matters. There's a scientific word called NEAT, N-E-A-T, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You're not putting on your gym shoes and packing your gym bag, but you're moving and you're causing your body to have a little activity. So fitness of all those varieties matters, sleep and fitness. Get checked, get a home blood pressure cuff. There's no way to know your blood pressure is elevated without checking it regularly. That should be a basic. If you've got, a scale at home, you probably should have an oximeter at home on your finger to check your oxygen. You should have a home blood pressure cuff. They're inexcusable not to have one. Stress management. That was a fundamental in the Ornish program you mentioned, and a key one. And I don't think our lives are less stressed than they were 40 years ago. I think we got more reason to believe they're more stressed. So whether yours is faith, music, breathing, fitness, nature walks, grounding and earthing, barefoot in the grass, maybe it's herbal. There's lots of herbal approaches to stress management if you can't find all the others to work. But, holding it all in or punching the door or erupting at your coworkers or your loved ones is obviously not a proper stress management approach. And there are studies that if you have a heart attack and you learn transcendental meditation, you drop your risk of a second heart attack by 50%. There's hardly a pill on the planet that's ever been shown to have that same potency. And these are randomized studies in major medical journals. So we get these lifestyle things ignored. So I think those are the big lifestyle pillars that aren't going to go away. They're going to remain more and more important.
All right, I want to talk about sex now. Specifically, you are the co-author of a book called Vegan Sex. So I want to hear, does a healthy sex life have medical or health outcome benefit?
A healthy sex life is scientifically proven to be a powerful health benefit. and joyful, and in a great relationship can, be one of the foundations of just a meaningful life. I can proudly say, being married 43 years to the same woman who I met at age 10. I mean, that's joy when you can have a relationship, whether it's in a marriage setting or whatever option you choose, but it's good. And we do know there are at least a few scientific studies that and the studies are in married couples. Again, there's many other arrangements that work for people that regularly are involved in sexual activity. And the numbers are 8 times a month. There you go, 100 times a year. We can easily, Ocean, you and I can develop an app that tracks that and gives you, it's the end of the month and you got 3 to go, and give people encouragement. But in the meantime, 8 times a month, 2 times a week can reduce heart attack risk and other cardiac events by about 50%. Powerful data. 50% reduction is meaningful. And most of these studies are unfortunately looking at male health and male outcomes, but we're pretty confident that they are gender neutral. So that's kind of the concept. Now, there's a whole lot of issues. It's the emotional joy. It's the maybe hormone release, the oxytocin, the endorphins. It's the fact that you have to have pretty good cardiovascular status and you have to have good plumbing to be successful in the sexual world. And it's the same approach to preventing heart attacks and keeping those youthful, flexible arteries in the heart are going to encourage youthful, flexible arteries in the sexual department. There are data that of all the foods on the planet, eating fruit is most associated with maintaining good sexual health long term. So that apple that Eve picked and gave to Adam was the first relationship where a fruit mattered in a sexual relationship, and it still, according to good studies, is important too.
Are there any, you mentioned fruits, are there any other specific foods that are potentially helpful in improving sexual function?
When we talk about food for sexual function, we have to come back to the Nobel Prize award-winning nitric oxide topic. And there are foods that boost nitric oxide, and they're not the 65% of calories that Americans eat of processed junk food, whether they're through a carry-out window or they're picking up at the deli or wherever. They are, green leafies promote nitric oxide production, produce better sexual health. They are beets rich in nitrates that produce nitric oxide and enhance sexual health. They are fruits and vegetables overall, slowly chewed, enjoyed in a family setting and social setting that will produce more nitric oxide. So the ticket to heart health is the ticket to sexual health, is the ticket to excellent brain health, and it all comes from a colorful plant-based plate.
What about pistachios?
Pistachios are rich in arginine, and I think pine nuts are too. Arginine is an amino acid that directly gets converted into nitric oxide. A lot of people take arginine powders, people in the gym world and the rest, but you can eat your way into better nitric oxide production with healthy pistachios. I would probably pick unsalted ones and have the healthiest version.
Well, you mentioned arginine. I want to talk a little bit more about amino acids now. Protein is a mixture of a bunch of different amino acids, some essential, some so-called non-essential amino acids. Animal protein is sometimes touted by some people as having a complete protein. Can you talk a little bit about the complete protein dynamic, essential and non-essential amino acids, and how much protein do we need?
The topic of protein, where you get it, the quality of protein, or do you have to combine it, is a very difficult topic, but it's a very important one right now. There is a movement amongst some scientists, some medical doctors, that are upping the concept that the only complete proteins are animal proteins, that the only way to maintain muscle mass, which is important, particularly as we age, is animal protein. Specifically, to quote an extremely well-known health MD online, if you're going to build muscle, you've got to eat muscle, and that's a reference specifically to the flesh of animals. And there's a book just out that's all about this muscle-centric, animal-based diet. And unfortunately, it's an unhealthy source of information, and I think it's incorrect because there have been, very importantly, even in the last 2 years, 5 or 6 studies that look at this setup. We've got 30 people that don't do weight training. We're going to take half of them and we're going to up their protein content with animal foods. We're going to take half of them and up their protein content with plant foods like faba beans or soybeans or other plant-based sources. We're going to train them for 12 weeks and we're going to measure what happens. All the studies show absolutely no difference in muscle gain. You got to do the work. You got to have, a gym or a barbell or do your push-ups or your planks. But where you source your protein is not essential for the gains. There's also been similar studies in the elderly. Elderly people that want to maintain their muscle mass, which again is an important concept, can do it perfectly adequately with a well-balanced plant-based approach, as you teach and I teach, and so many other good, health experts do teach. It's myth that it has to come from animal foods. There are a couple amino acids that the plant-based diet can be a little bit problematic with. One that has probably the most science is creatine. A lot of people know that heavy weightlifters will go to the stores and buy creatine powders. It's usually CMP, creatine monophosphate. And they may take very large doses, 25 grams a day, 5+ grams a day in these powders. There are some downsides, at least. There is swelling and water weight and the rest that can occur. Much more modest intake of creatine may not be a bad idea. 2-3 times a week to take 2 to 3 grams a day. There have been a few, not many studies in vegetarian. I'm not sure I've seen one in a purely vegan population that creatine supplementation in a weight program in a vegetarian may enhance your gym performance. These are vegan supplements, so we don't have to violate our commitment not to eat animals if that's your commitment. So that's one that I bring up. Taurine and glycine are 2 others that do exist in plant-based foods, but they can be richer in animal foods, and they're options. Now, on the other hand, lots of athletes are buying branch-chain amino acid powders or supplements, particularly leucine, methionine. And the aging data, and particularly what's often called the anti-aging data, is very strong that high intake of methionine and leucine amino acids may actually trigger aging pathways. And aging is associated with diseases like cancer. So I shy away and don't advise my patients to supplement with branch-chain amino acids. It may be one of the advantages of plant-based diets that we are what is called a low methionine diet. And there's plenty of research articles people can look up about the advantages of low methionine diet. And I go like this a lot when I'm reading some of my colleagues on social media pushing methionine supplements when the cancer data and the aging data suggests a low methionine approach is fine. Now, these aren't zero. We're always going to get some glycine, some taurine, some methionine from having our tempeh or our tofu or our beans or our peas. You don't have to eat perfect. You don't have to combine the right carbohydrate with the right protein. If you want to have rice and beans as one of your staples, you'll always get a great combination in your diet. But I do think creatine has a bit of a attractive benefit for people that are in the gym and are eating plant-based.
I'd like to ask your opinion on so-called plant meats. All the different products flooding the marketplace now, and it looks like there's going to be a lot more coming out in the years to come. Are these a step in the right direction or not? And also included in that, Dr. Christopher Gardner's recent swap meat study, if you're familiar with it, if you could touch on that.
Plant meats are certainly hot in the industry. They're being pushed by some large organizations and some large and well-known billionaires. And there are, always 3 reasons. Is it going to be good for animals to have plant meats? And that's very obvious. The answer is yes, that the cruelty and the just horrific circumstances of, billions and billions of chickens and hundreds of thousands of cows and sheep and pigs losing their lives. when there's going to be a plant alternative will be diminished, and hooray for that. There's going to be the environmental standpoint, and there is clearly overwhelming data that the resources needed to make plant meats are much less than they are to raise, animals in their factory farming situation, which is where most of these foods are from, and bully for that. And that's why the environmental groups are pushing plant meats for the future as we approach 10 billion people on the planet. It's going to be much more efficient and less toxic to the planet to do that from plant-based sources. The final one is the health issue, and that's the tough one. There aren't a lot of studies. We read that ingredient list on the back of some of the plant-based meats, and we sometimes cringe, with a chemical list, even though they have certainly mastered the taste, the appearance, the smell. I mean, they're gotten very good at some of this stuff. I shy away from them personally. We very rarely do that in my home. But I think they're a great transition choice. I'm used to eating a beef burger, and I've transitioned to a plant-based burger. And maybe the next step is you learn how to make a homemade black bean burger or quinoa burger like we do in my home. But I wouldn't criticize you using that as a stepping stone. And then you get to the swap meat study, Chris Gardner at Stanford, and they took a beef patty, maybe 8 ounces, I don't remember. Maybe that's too big for a burger, what do I know? And they took, actually they did, I think it was the Beyond Meat burger brand, and they compared the environmental resources to create one plant-based burger versus one beef burger. And the resources like water consumption, if I remember that correctly, were about 90% less to make a plant burger than a beef burger. And then they looked at greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions. And they also followed the advantage. And that's why there's this push out there. Now, a more ethical dilemma is actually the factory meat, the lab meat industry, which hasn't yet hit the shelves big time. But the fact that you'll be able to actually grow genetically equivalent beef, chicken, pork, and turkey, not in a factory farm. No animal suffers. The environment doesn't suffer to the degree that factory farming. What will happen down the road with those options that may be more efficient and environmentally efficient? Are we going to eat a chicken breast that was grown in a lab when we've always said no because we're whole food plant-based? Interestingly, this also transects with something overlaps. I follow the dietary laws called keeping kosher. And this has become an issue. Are these lab meats kosher? Because there is no animal slaughtered, there is no animal suffering, and that's one of the bases for the kosher laws. So very interesting ethical and environmental questions. But generally, a plant-based meal is going to be healthier for the planet and probably healthier for the human than any animal meal you can stack it up against.
Interestingly, there was another study that was just published recently, also a swap meat title that Dr. Gardner conducted on cardiovascular health, where 36 people half were given meat burgers and half were given Beyond Burgers. And they found that the TMAO levels in the Beyond Burger eaters were much, much lower. And there were a number of other cardioprotective benefits. Everything seemed better in terms of cardiovascular health, all other factors being the same, which was very interesting, I think. It was a small study funded by Beyond Meat, interestingly, although they gave it as an unrestricted grant and didn't have any say in the process thereafter. So more to learn on this, obviously, but there are some, hopefully, potential health benefits to this transition, although, of course, I fully agree with you. It's a stepping stone. It's not, if we're looking at what's optimal, it's not going to be highly processed anything. Joel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on intermittent fasting. Does time-restricted eating have benefit? And if so, tell us about that.
Time-restricted eating, and that's a good term, TRE. If you talk to a scientist in the world of fasting, they're going to tell you just by skipping breakfast, you really shouldn't use the term fasting. Fasting is 24 or 36 hours of not eating at all. Then you can apply the term fasting. But in the public and in the news and in the media, just skipping breakfast is typically called IF, intermittent fasting, right or wrong. It should be called TRE, time-restricted eating. clearly, we eat too much, we eat too many calories, and we eat too many hours a day on average, and we need some strategy to cut back. And cutting out a meal a day is certainly a logical strategy, or cutting out 2 meals a day may be a logical strategy, but is it healthy? So there's a couple versions out there. There's a version called OMAD, 1 meal a day diet. It's also known as the warrior diet, based on a book from about 15, 20 years ago by an Israeli veteran, military veteran that promoted this. And although it's attractive, and some people do it, I skip breakfast, I skip lunch, and I eat 2,400 calorie dinner. There were a couple studies published in the 20 years ago that suggested these were not helpful, that they do lead to more insulin resistance, higher cholesterol when you pack all your calories into a 2-3 hour window late in the day. And I do not teach the OMAD diet. I try and actually discourage people doing it. And surprisingly, a lot of my patients either do it accidentally. They're just so busy they don't eat till dinner, or they're doing it purposely. It does work for some people. Some people have lost weight, but it's not a healthy long-term diet. Much more popular is skipping breakfast and eating maybe in a 6-hour window, and that's often called intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, maybe eating from 12 to 6. And it should be a good solution. But in actual studies, one done at UCSF about 3 years ago by a cardiology colleague of mine, it didn't work. Dr. Ethan Weiss was a big advocate of skipping breakfast, but when he did a randomized study and followed up on the metabolic consequences, it didn't work, and he abandoned that approach in his own life and in his teaching. And a similar, fairly impressive study in China in the last year also failed to show that the anticipated benefits were there. Really, the pyramid of what's often called chrononutrition, eating time-wise for your benefit, is to pack more of your calories in breakfast. Eat breakfast like a king, a modest amount at lunch, lunch like a prince, and a small dinner, eat dinner like a pauper. That's a frequent expression. But the latest studies show when you do that, you actually lower your risk for type 2 diabetes significantly. You do lower your calorie intake by making that last meal of the day smaller and lighter. It's socially awkward, of course, if you're entertaining a dinner or you have various events. So you don't have to stick to it 100%. But several studies show skipping breakfast increases cardiovascular risk. That surprises people. But a major study in Madrid and other studies show it. So going back to breakfast like a king, healthy breakfast, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper, some days of the week is a good way to do it. My nutritional guru is Dr. Walter Longo. When we talk about not plant-based doctors, I have a lot of nutritional gurus in the plant-based world. You're one of them. But Dr. Longo does teach an 11 to 12-hour eating window as enough time-restricted eating to get benefits, and sustainable and consistent with longevity and centenarian aging studies, that most communities where people are living long, healthy health spans and lifespans, they're not eating in a 2-hour window. They're eating 3 meals a day of modest calories, largely plant-based, fresh food.
One of the controversies, I want to talk about a couple of controversies now that we see discussed a lot, is lectins. Can you tell us what lectins are, why some people think they're a problem, and what the research says?
Yeah, lectins are a chemical group, and if I remember right, they're proteins that bind to carbohydrates, and I may have that opposite. I have not looked up the chemical science in a little bit. But there are hundreds of compounds that fall into a family with a similar structure, and they're found ubiquitously in animal foods and plant foods. I don't think many people were talking about lectins until 2017, when a cardiac surgeon who became a lifestyle doctor, Dr. Stephen Gundry, MD, who trained at University of Michigan where I trained, 10 years older than me, and he became a cardiac surgeon, I became a cardiologist, published that book, The Plant Paradox, that used inflammatory language. I mean, I don't make this up, but these were killer lectins, that these chemicals are being made by plants. Now, he ignored the fact that they also exist in animal foods, but being made by plants to protect plants. They're toxic chemicals, and when we ingest the plants, we're ingesting toxins, and they could kill us, or they wouldn't be killer lectins. And eating just a few raw kidney beans could kill you. I mean, I'm quoting him exactly. And it was nothing but media hype. Unfortunately, that book sold, I think, 35 million copies in 35 languages. Crazy successful book, or something like that, highly successful. And it just scared people away. And what foods in the plant world have the highest concentration of lectins? Legumes. Peas, beans, lentils, the very foods that study after study say are most associated with good health, longevity, low cholesterol, avoiding cardiovascular disease, promoting good brain health, avoiding type 2 diabetes, the very foods that science says were good for you, he was shying you away from. Or take so much care in preparing those foods that it became onerous. In fact, if you wash and rinse your beans and pressure cook them and steam them, and you eat what people eat, soft cooked beans, lentils, and peas. I don't see any kid snacks that are raw kidney bean snacks that you put in your kid's lunchbox. It doesn't exist. There have been rare examples of undercooking legumes and people getting stomach upset. It's not killer lectins. So all that misinformation continues from that date to this date, unfortunately. There are many lectins that are actually used with therapeutic sources. Mistletoe, the famous Christmas plant, is actually rich in lectins, and certain patients with cancer get treated with lectins from mistletoe with a therapeutic benefit. So do not fear legumes. Ignore Dr. Gundry. Sorry, Dr. Gundry, go blue, U of M, but you are misinforming the public. And you don't need to buy his lectin blocker vitamins. Just, cook your foods. We have a great company I'm not related to in Michigan called Eden Foods, and everybody recognizes their canned beans are pressure cooked and prepared in very safe cans. And I'm sure there's many other companies that do a great job, but that's one that's often on my shelf in my home.
Lectins are one of a class of foods sometimes called anti-nutrients. Also in that group is oxalates and goitrogens and phytoestrogens, phytates and tannins. Can you tell us a little bit about what these anti-nutrients are and whether there's any cause for concern about them?
I want to applaud you for your expertise on anti-nutrients. That list you just rattled off was very impressive. And it does overlap with discussing lectins, compounds in nature that might bind some important nutrients, bind minerals, and make them a little more difficult to absorb. Compounds in nature, particularly plant foods, that may interfere with some of our hormones, like you said, phytoestrogens. When you talk about, for example, oxalates, there are kidney stones called calcium oxalate stones, and nobody wants a kidney stone attack. It can be very, very painful. There was a media event 3-4 years ago. One of the Hemsworth, Chris or Liam Hemsworth, big hunky Australian actor, had been eating plant-based, and he announced, I give up because I've got kidney stones since I've been eating this way. It became pretty clear he was putting an enormous amount of spinach in his smoothie every single day, and he probably has a genetic predisposition for oxalate kidney stones. All somebody had to tell him is there's 3 greens that are very rich in oxalates. It has to be spinach, rhubarb, and Swiss chard. And if you love those foods, you probably want to eat them once or twice a week. I think spinach is the one people are most surprised about because it's very common. I'll put a handful of spinach every day in my smoothie. And for many people, that's fine. It works for them. They love their spinach salad or their spinach smoothie. But it may be reasonable to rotate greens and limit those big 3 and eat arugula and eat romaine and eat watercress. Watercress is probably the most underappreciated green on the planet, with some data that it's one of the richer sources. Eat broccoli sprouts and learn how to sprout at home, another great source. So watch your oxalates. But in general, the anti-nutrient classes are not associated with disease. There are some wonderful scientific review articles on each and every one of these. And the benefits of eating foods. You talk about, phytoestrogens. That always brings up the soy topic and the tofu tempeh edamame topic. And it's pretty clear that that certain nutrition groups that favor animal foods have really done a good media job to give soy a bad reputation. When it's one of the least expensive, healthiest foods, I choose organic soy products because a lot of them otherwise are GMO altered. That's what's fed to cows and chickens and lambs. So people eating animal foods are getting animals fed on GMO altered soybeans, but most humans eat organic soybeans if you're buying them in stores. And, they're anti-estrogens, even though they have some similarity to animal-based. When you're eating a beef burger, and if it came from a female cow, you're getting actual estrogen in your diet that might interact with an estrogen receptor on your breast or your prostate and could be part of a trigger towards a disease we call cancer. But when you're eating tofu, you've got a anti-estrogen called a phytoestrogen, and it may confuse the public, but the science is very clear. You lower your risk of heart disease, you lower your risk of various cancers like prostate and breast by eating some of these foods rich in phytoestrogens. So fear not the plant-based foods. You don't have to be a PhD chemist to figure this stuff out. It's pretty clear.
One of the so-called anti-nutrients is goitrogens. And some people who are dealing with thyroid issues have been told to avoid goitrogens, goitrogens being prominent in a lot of cruciferous vegetables in particular. Can you talk a little bit about this controversy?
Goitrogen, a goiter is, of course, a enlargement of the thyroid. Could be a nodule, could be the entire thyroid. Certainly something that's been described in medicine for decades and decades. And the thyroid can enlarge and then it can reverse back to normal health. And there's been this idea that you may have trouble converting some of your thyroid hormones to let them be fully active if your diet is very rich in certain green leafies and maybe soy products. Largely, if you go to the medical science, last I looked, and it's been a couple of years, there was 1 or 2 case reports of serious thyroid disease from, as I recall, one case report was a woman eating an enormous amount of bok choy. I think it was literally pounds of bok choy every single day. And, that's not a balanced diet that anybody would recommend. That's not a rainbow-colored rotating diet. That's, sort of like putting a pound of spinach in your smoothie every morning and never rotating. But unless people get taught, they won't know. It's very rarely reported as a problem. On the other hand, to bring up a clinical topic we haven't touched on, iodine is a mineral that is important for thyroid health. And iodine is a nutrient of concern in the public in general. We're all being taught to limit our salt intake. I endorse that. A lot of us used to use iodinized salt like Morton's in our food, and certainly restaurants do. But we often have a low iodine diet, and that may not be optimal. There is a simple urine test that gives you your urine iodine level. I run in my clinic routinely, and a lot of people are iodine deficient and aren't aware of it. We brought up in a previous question you asked a vegan support vitamin called Complement Essentials, and one of the 8 nutrients in Complement Essentials is a modest amount of iodine, recognizing that the science says that can be deficient in a vegan diet. But I want to point out, in my own clinical experience, it's common to be deficient in an omnivore diet, an animal-based diet too. So if you want optimal thyroid health, don't fear your green leafies, your cruciferous, don't fear your soy-based healthy organic products. But maybe, sprinkle some kelp on your food. Eat seaweed once in a while if it's within your taste range, or maybe supplement with a low amount of iodine periodically. Some of the multivitamins made by prominent plant-based doctors also have iodine in them, wisely chosen.
Stepping back a little bit, what we eat has a profound impact on our health, on our quality of life, on how we feel. Can you share with us why you love the work that you do and why you are passionate about inspiring people to eat healthier foods?
I've been practicing medicine for 35 years with a lot of years of training before then. And I've seen, wonderful advances in procedures and surgeries and pharmaceuticals and other approaches to just my field, just cardiovascular disease. But we're not approaching the root cause of many people's problem with surgery, with pharmaceuticals. We're not Lipitor deficient. We don't have a bypass deficiency. We have a lack of understanding of the importance of lifestyle and disease development, lifestyle and disease prevention, and particularly nutrition and disease prevention. And it's a multi-billion, maybe multi-trillion-dollar industry. There's huge forces that want to confuse us and sway us, and there is some legitimate, scientific debate. But again, in my field of cardiovascular disease, 99% of the science supports whole food plant-based eating as the foundation for disease prevention, disease reversal, health span enhancement, and maybe longevity enhancement. That's always a tough one to approach, but probably longevity. So I am just fired up and fueled up, as much as I was 35 years ago, to reach as many people as possible and be part of the team. You're on the team, you're a leader. I'm proud to be part of the team. It might be one-on-one in my office, and it might be reaching hundreds of thousands of people, which obviously is a joy, with the data that do not be confused. Sometimes it's okay not to follow somebody online. Sometimes it's okay to pause before you believe that to build muscle, you have to eat muscle. No, find a credible source, do the research. And it's tough for the public. So I like to jump in and be part of the teaching, and it has to be science-based. My postings on social media are very often scientific articles that aren't as popular as a picture of Kim Kardashian, but people need to know that this is credible and scientifically appropriate resources, not just my opinion, their opinion.
If you imagine with me for a moment, what if humanity as a whole moved towards a whole foods plant-based diet? Paint a picture for us. What might that world look like? How would our world change?
I hate to be too biblical, but it'd be pretty much the lion lie down with the lamb in the Garden of Eden. And some of those early stories from the Bible are so inspiring, and many people do base their plant-based decisions on Genesis 1:29, if I have my scripture right, about the plants of the earth being our foods. But I think there would be an explosion of health. There'd be a reduction in the necessity for prescription drugs and surgeries and hospitalizations. I think we'd make an impact on the obesity epidemic, which is destroying health in children and adults. I think we'd see a kindness. I strongly believe, and I think you do too, that choosing not to use animals as my food source makes me sensitive and mindful and makes my life more meaningful. And it would, I think, spread to other people. I don't think we'll ever have too much kindness in the world, and we could use a little bit more right now. So I would see a beautiful world around us. And we're still going to have natural disasters, and we're not going to cure every single disease on the planet. But I think we would get out of this kind of downward spiral. A lot of us fear is going on in the world.
If you want to find out if you have heart disease, what are the top 3 things to do?
3 top things. Number 1, get a heart calcium CT scan. Number 2, get extra lab work. Get some lab work, get extra lab work. Get extra lab work for your vitamin levels. We've talked about vitamin D and omega-3. We haven't mentioned something called homocysteine and lipoprotein little a, maybe your 3-month blood sugar called your hemoglobin A1C, and maybe your inflammation level called your high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Be an advocate for your health. Get a few extra blood tests. That's number 2. And number 3, have a few home devices. There is no way you can be healthy without a home blood pressure cuff. It's not possible. You have to check your blood pressure. You have to have a home scale. You might want to have an oximeter that checks your heart rate and your oxygen level. That's about a $20 little device you can buy. So do those 3 steps, and you will be an educated, knowledgeable person. And heart disease is reversible. So if the testing doesn't come out as joyful as you anticipate, don't get down in the dumps. Just get credible information through diet and lifestyle and other measures. We clearly can reverse heart disease.
Joel, you are such a fountain of wisdom and inspiration, credible, scientifically grounded. thoughtful. And I think there's wisdom and intelligence, and those aren't always the same thing. And in my experience, you bring both. I'm so honored to work with you and to bring your wisdom into the world, and so grateful for your decades of leadership and study and research, and the clarity with which you share it, and the generosity with which you share it with all of us. We've been talking here with Dr. Joel Kahn, America's Healthy Heart Doc, best-selling author, and a leader and inspiration to millions. Joel, thank you so much for joining us and for your partnership in the food revolution.
Thank you, Ocean. Thank you to your amazing father, John, also. Thank you.